Let's get the boring stuff out of the way first. Before proceeding with this video, I warn you that it will discuss topics that are sensitive for many people, such as suicide, depression, trauma, and etc., which is why I don't recommend indulging if you're not in the right mental space. Furthermore, this video will contain full spoilers to Omori, which is why I recommend playing the game before watching this video. The topics in this video essay are debated to this day, and what I share isn't some kind of unspoken truth, but merely my perspective and interpretation on a few things. What you choose to do with it is really up to you, but this does not constitute as a replacement to genuine professional advice. With these disclaimers out of the way, the video may proceed. What you're hearing in the background is Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, or Moonlight. I was never one for music really, but when I heard this piece for the first time, even if I was, and still am, completely illiterate in classical music, I still felt this one. The ode to the night sky. So close, yet so far away. So infinite, yet so intimate. It's music that gives word to something unspoken. Melancholy, sorrow, or perhaps beauty. And we can talk about it for hours, but one thing is certain. It's works like these, created by people like you and I, that we get a glimpse into something very personal. Their essence, their soul, whatever you want to call it. What will remain is your work, long after your passing. Claude Debussy died in 1918, but here we are listening to one of his most famous works 107 years later. Isn't that actually kind of mind-blowing? The original was done on piano, and due to a very draconian copyright system, I couldn't put it in the background now, so what you are hearing instead is an orchestral rendition of it, and it captures the identical beauty of the original, and in a way, I want to try to do the same with this video. I've played a lot of games from a variety of genres, but to me, the most memorable ones are those indie games that you see once and yearn to redo your first blind playthrough of. Five Nights at Freddy's, Celeste, Stardew Valley, Undertale, Cuphead, Hollow Knight, there's a trillion of them. And we've all seen the memes. How a AAA game doesn't get a blink out of you, but an indie game you paid $10 for changes your very outlook on life itself. And I think there really is a lot of truth to that actually. While they differ from AAA titles in quality, complexity, and expectations, I'd argue indie games possess something those larger productions often lack: soul. Witnessing these works feels more like a journey than anything else. Omori began as a simple webcomic and evolved into a grand video game that has really come a long way. It's not made by a corporation that seeks to appeal to consumers, break even, and then profit, but instead by people who simply have an interest and passion for the craft. And I think video games themselves have really evolved into their own type of media and art form. And just like all art, it's capable of speaking the unspoken, immersing players into new worlds and providing unforgettable experiences. Just like all art forms, they express feelings that words alone could never capture. As the famous saying goes, art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. However, I do have a confession to make. I did initially judge a book by its cover. The game started development in 2014, was published in 2020, and you're watching this video on its 5-year anniversary. That time gap is hard to miss. And I gotta be completely honest with you, what started off as an attempt to paying homage to a game I appreciate really did become a deep dive into the very fabrics of modern society and the individual. But the best way to start would be with some context. That would be 2021.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus. Days when you don't want to wake up. Everything is fucked. Everybody sucks. You don't really know why, but you want to justify ripping someone's head off. No human contact, and if you interact, your life is on contract. Your best bet is to stay away, motherfucker. It's just one of those days. It's all about the he says, she says bullshit. I think you better quit, let shit slip, or you'll be leaving with a fat lip.
"2021 needs no introduction. Pandemics, lockdowns, insurrections, and instability. We all know it too well, and all it did was set the standard for the rest of the ongoing decade. It's a topic I want to explore in a separate video, but society never really progressed. I think over time it actually regressed. There are still active genocides going on in the world. People are still being fed bread and circuses. The oligarchical grip over major governments didn't lighten, but rather tighten, and late-stage capitalism and globalism are continuing to destroy not just the environment, but its own citizens. The collective is nowhere to be found, and soon, even the individual. Slowly, the line between reality and fiction in the works of Orwell, Bradbury, Huxley, and etc. is getting blurrier and blurrier. I mean, you guys are surprised over chat control, but nobody is talking about how Julian Assange outed the NSA for doing this 10 years ago. And who can blame you? So much stuff going on every second, you need wings to stay above it. Because every second you're told to consume. Even this feels overwhelmingly fast to mention. Okay, so none of this was really invented in 2021, but it was greatly accelerated to a new level. The emotional isolation and cultural division, of course. Traditional sources of connection, religion, community, stable work, and family were slowly eroded by globalization, economic instability, and a cultural drift towards individualism. People moved more, worked longer for less security, and sought meaning in personal achievement rather than shared belonging. The internet filled the gap, first as a bridge, but later on as a stage? Platforms became optimized for performance and consumption rather than genuine vulnerability, and they rewarded constant engagement but little depth. Christmas lost its meaning and became a time of discounts and purchasing. Streaming platforms made you pay to watch shows with ads, and the odds of owning a house are eroding by the second. Social medias and the doom-scrolling effect grew rapidly, and short-form content became the new standard. The effects of a hyper-consumerist society is most visible when looking at our relationships with actual vulnerability and emotions. Emotional sincerity was sidelined or mocked far before this, especially for men already taught to suppress feeling. They just retreated behind irony, detachment, or hypermasculine posturing, slowly opening up, but like a hedgehog, as you approach another one for warmth and suddenly feel its spikes, you retreat again. And then the COVID-19 pandemic came. When COVID-19 arrived, it cut what little remained of in-person connection, and life shifted almost entirely online, where algorithms pushed people deeper into echo chambers and ideological extremes. But let's not forget, algorithms are just designed to pick up what you are into. Trust in institutions rapidly collapsed. Political identity became a substitute for purpose almost, and out of which came these words: woke and anti-woke. And these camps weren't merely in disagreement over abortion or gay people. They were fighting two incompatible visions for rebuilding a fractured culture. One fought for rebuilding purpose through diversity and inclusion, and the other one clung to tradition and hierarchy. But it was never about the actual meaning of those words, but the sense of belonging it provided in an otherwise drifting world. because it feels more empowering to be a woke progressive or an anti-woke conservative rather than a cut-off loner with more issues than he's ready to admit, right? When restrictions were lifted, something had changed for good. The return to normal revealed how much had been lost or how nothing was there in the first place. Everyone carried grief or disillusionment, yet sharing it often made it heavier. Vulnerability that came out of bottled up feelings and necessity started to feel excessive, even performative. So people shut themselves off again, not from a lack of feeling, but from too much with nowhere to put it. Individualism, once a cultural trend, hardened into a coping mechanism, and in that climate, even art that spoke openly about pain or trauma risked dismissal. Not always from malice, just exhaustion. The overall perversion of mental health in Western society didn't help at all. Talks of mental health and depression felt almost pretentious, boring, and excessive, and nothing had truly healed. What did remain was a society emotionally starved, epistemologically fractured, and locked in a culture war where nobody could talk eye to eye. When I'm talking about the perversion of mental health in the West, I'm not talking about mental health not being important, but rather that the conversation around it was flattened and commercialized. On one hand, schools, workplaces, and media suddenly began pushing mental health awareness campaigns, but that awareness was real shallow, often tied to self-help slogans, pop psychology, or quick diagnoses. Because hey, this one Instagram reel said I have depression and I got to live, laugh, love, and never unionize. Thanks, Mr. Bezos. Energetic and restless kids became ADHD or ADD or autism or neurodivergent. I mean, who keeps track of these names anymore? Feeling tired, sad, or unmotivated got pathologized as depression, without the nuance to separate fleeting moods from, well, actual life-altering illness. This oversaturation dulled the meaning of the words. Depression became a meme, anxiety a punchline, and therapy a quirky personality trait. You are enough turned into a perfect phrase to slap onto merchandise. All while the structural reasons for people's despair, such as crushing debt, isolation, broken families, lack of security, and more, went completely untouched. Talking about mental health began to feel redundant or performative because nothing had changed when I opened up. And instead of granting space for real vulnerability, it made people roll their eyes. But let me make this clear. According to the World Health Organization, 720,000 people die by suicide every year. That's almost 750,000. That statistic hasn't really changed that much, and it tells you one thing. The topic of depression, suicide, isolation, and etc. should still be talked about, because if they were just redundant talking points, the numbers would back it, except they clearly aren't doing that. Hence why the mental health discussion needs to continue, but not in a way that undermines actual feelings over profitability or performance. But despite that, when I heard about a game that promises to tackle mental health, my reaction was kind of, ugh, not this shit again. And it's not because mental health isn't important, but because the culture has cheapened the language around it, and people pretending to understand it made us gag at the thought of it. This is sort of the cultural climate in which Omori found itself, and I gotta say, it's really brave. Because the topics of depression, suicide, isolation, and anxiety really have been tackled a lot in recent years. And I feel everybody here. I also felt like therapy was a woman's thing, and a man ought to die on the job and never make a peep, and that you can always be in a worse off situation, hence you don't have the right to feel any kind of sadness. You could be sleeping on a bench and you wouldn't even think about this depression, and instead you're going to be thinking about what you're going to eat that day. And it really reminds me of this clip from The Sopranos, a show that aired before the rise of the internet, and it really sums up the whole issue with modern society and mental health.
Hi, Mom.
Oh, look who's decided to join us. And with that breath.
You know, I really don't need that right now, Ma.
Oh, aren't we being sensitive?
Here we go.
How come My son's in the bathrobe. Is he sick?
He's fine.
Dad, you're depressed.
Depressed. My father came to this country with 17 cents in his pocket, and he never made a peep.
Ma?
What's he got to be depressed about? Nobody threw him into the glue factory and sold his house out from underneath him.
Ma, we all agreed we would sell your home.
I'm going back upstairs.
I was making a joke. Oh, yeah, I suppose it would be better if I never opened my mouth.
Grandma, how could it be a joke if you're crying?
Oh, I mean, this is really the last time.
720,000 people annually. That's not a small number at all. If we can make a bunch of Call of Duty, Tom Clancy action shooters, I think it's also fine to make a few games that talk about what's going on inside our heads and everyday struggles. The same way we do with movies and shows anyways. It's really perplexing to me how both I and everybody else very easily ran with the idea that Omori is just a quirky, indie, Earthbound-inspired RPG about depression that's just a waste of time. But honestly, isn't that kind of creative recycling the very foundation of the entire gaming industry? In fact, you could say the same for most art because styles, ideas, and tropes get passed down, reshaped, and reinterpreted. It's how mediums evolve, right? I mean, every opinion I have, every creative work I experience, is built on layers of influence. Games I've played beforehand, stories I've read, conversations I've had. And yes, this process creates recognizable patterns, but that's not a flaw unique to indie RPGs or, quote, emotional games. It's a universal part of creative expression itself. Think of big AAA titles like the Wolfenstein reboot or Cyberpunk 2077. Calling them shooter slop would be unfair because despite their familiar mechanics, they bring their own narrative depth, world building, and design choices. Even Earthbound, often praised for its originality, drew inspiration from earlier works like the Peanuts comics and the Dragon Quest series. And even Shakespeare, he even reworked older stories too. So yeah, maybe complete originality is a myth, but that's not the point. The point is that originality stems from what you did with everything you have. What makes a game or any media unique isn't whether its building blocks have been used before, but how its creators assemble them into something that reflects their own voice. For example, Undertale really resonated with me not because it invented the RPG, but because it's Toby Fox's personal take on the genre, and it's filtered through his sensibilities, humor, and ideas. Because like I said, indie games give us a peek into the creator themselves, just like any other kind of media they produce. And to be completely honest, this video essay isn't unique either. You can only go so far talking about Omori. It came out in 2020, and people have dissected its gameplay, themes, and art style before me. And I can't really promise you unheard revelations. What I can offer you is my take, one shaped by my experiences, thoughts, and feelings. And it's not about saying something no one's ever said, it's about saying it in your own way. But I gotta say, it's still sad to see how genuine, open discussion about emotions in art has been reframed as a weakness or reduced to some political statement. And I mean this, whatever the hell this conservative stance is, it doesn't really reject ideas, but actual empathy itself. And when it's an indie game in the crosshairs, the dismissal isn't just aimed at the product itself, but at the developer's, actual feelings, passion, hard work, and creative vision. But I mean, the best way to fight back against that is by choosing to still do it, even when you see shit like this.
Oh, gay ass nigga, shut up, shut up, shut up. Oh, I ain't listening to you.
I mean, get this, the second you diss Undertale, a game with underlying themes of empathy and mercy, everybody is jumping on your throat. But Omori, completely fine. And it's not that criticizing Omori is forbidden, but it's clearly held to a different standard due to an already present bias. It's a strange cultural tug-of-war, where both sides misrepresent it based on surface-level impressions, and it feels like a setup for a joke, but you're still waiting for the punchline. A vocal minority of self-proclaimed fans reduced the game and its content to a kind of Tumblr core aesthetic, slapping pride flags behind characters and labeling them as literally me, with little regard for the actual narrative. Because trust me when I say it, there is not even a layer of sexuality in Omori, despite the weirdos that inhabit the fandom. And it's fine to find comforting characters. Maybe they mirror your own experiences or genuinely inspire you. But when that attachment becomes more about aesthetic branding than actual engagement with the story, it cheapens how the work is perceived by everybody else. And then in reaction, an equally loud, Redditor, macho, Tate-pilled crowd dismisses the entire game as woke bullshit. And not because of its actual content, but because of the fandom it attracted. And this cycle is fed further by fanfiction, shipping, this god-awful gif, which can distort the tone and intent of the game before newcomers have a chance to see it for themselves. I'm scrolling through the subreddit right now, and in the fan art section, if you're unlucky enough, you can find softcore child. I mean, in the end, both the over-aestheticized fandom and the knee-jerk political dismissal are both escapisms that prevent people from exposing themselves to new works and ideas. And you wonder why you're depressed when you're unwilling to experience any new media, be it a show, film, or game. This right now is already deserving of a video of its own, but I think it shows well the context in which I found this game. Because let me level with you, a lot of people still stick to outdated ideas, such as how emotions are for women and what men should do is just have a friend and drink beer with them and the sadness magically goes away. But the statistic I mentioned before, about 720,000 annual suicides, males die by a suicide at a rate approximately 3 to 4 times higher than females, despite females being more likely to commit suicide. And this gender paradox implies males use much more lethal methods of suicide and are far more dead set on it. And my point isn't to undermine female struggles, but rather to comment that this rhetoric of a male being some Alexei Stakhanov coal miner in Odessa who can take on the entire world is clearly false and is preventing men from getting actual help and talking about it. Understanding this broader context of emotional isolation matters because it sets the stage for why Omori resonated with so many people. It arrived in a moment when people were finally recognizing the cost of silence. And nothing embodies that quiet, internal struggle quite like the first thing the player hears, the main menu theme.